What's up, Yinzers, Yinzettes? Welcome back to yet another episode of Pucks and Net, where we'll give you the latest downtown breakdowns and everything from the past week in Penguins hockey. If you've been paying attention, Monday was the draft lottery, and something interesting happened. The Penguins bumped down a little bit, so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk some potential draft prospects for the Penguins at 11th overall. And I'm joined today by the one, the only Jesse Marshall. He's coming on the show from The Athletic. Lots of great prospect insight. Jesse, thank you for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Always good to talk to you.
Awesome. And yeah, we can jump right in. So as I said before, the draft lottery was on Monday. Going into the draft lottery, Penguins were at 9th overall. They bumped down 2 spots to 11th overall, leapfrog by the Islanders, who are now picking 1st overall, and the Utah Hockey Club picking 14th or 4th overall, rather. So just want to get your thoughts on just the draft lottery itself and what happened this year, because we don't see this every day where 2 teams leapfrog into the top 4 like that.
Yeah, like if you're looking for a statistical number to give you what that outcome was for the Penguins, it was 1.7%. So that was that was the likelihood that 2 teams behind them leapt up and pushed them to 11. So the good news is I was talking to a scout buddy of mine that works in the West, and he told me that he uses the term mashed potatoes to describe this draft class, because if you have a pick that's like 6 to 17, 18, 19, pick 6 might be mashed potatoes and gravy. Pick 7 might be mashed potatoes with sour cream and chives. Maybe 7 has mashed potatoes with bacon in it. So you can find something in there that's your taste. But when it's all said and done, you're eating mashed potatoes just like everybody else is. So, like, that's being said, like, I don't think there's there's not a drop between 9 and 11. I jokingly, and I'm half kidding when I say this, but like, I really like Victor Eklund. We'll talk about that in a second. But now you teeter on the spot on whether or not you think you might be able to get him there. So like player wise, you shuffle yourself around, but I think in terms of like quality, this was not a devastating night for the Penguins. And by all means, defer that luck, that, whatever, 98.3% is left over from the 1.7 we talked about, and send that to the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, right? Like that's where you want to be the Islanders or better, right? Even if, whatever position you finish in, you want your ball to be drawn there. So I do wish they would have explained it to people first, because we're used to just seeing envelopes open up, right? Like that's how it usually goes. They open up an envelope and then you find out what happened. And like, I don't think we all understood initially that they were eliminating teams right away, and if your ball getting drawn first wasn't a good thing. So like that was kind of crazy, but overall I thought it was done well. Like I thought they saved a lot of the prognosticating for after it was over. And I think the outcome is interesting, Kelsey, because like the Islanders are the only team that could have won the lottery and thrown a wrench into the outcome. Because like James Higgins is doing media with the NHL today, begging the Islanders to take him, like saying like, I can't see myself leaving New York. Like I love it here. I know everything about the Islanders history. Like I couldn't see myself playing anywhere else. Like there's really a question of like, what do they do? Like, I don't personally think James Higgins is the best player in this class. He knocked on the door for a long time, but I think as the year went on, like it didn't shake out the way you probably wanted if you're a James Higgins super fan. So do they trade down? Do they try to accrue assets and move to stay in a Higgins range, but give someone else that first overall pick? Do they take James Higgins and shock the world? I don't know. But the narrative now, there was always this, is it Schaefer or Misa discussion? And now you get this like extra Higgins flavor that none of us expected at the same time. So the result stunk. But like I said, if you're going to have a result stink, you've got Gavin McKenna. And if people don't know, Kelsey, like Gavin McKenna is unbelievable. Like he's the closest thing to Sidney Crosby we've had since Sidney Crosby. And Landon DuPont the following year is not that bad of a consolation prize. I mean, he's probably the best defenseman we've seen come through the ranks in, I don't know, a decade. Like we're talking like Cale Makar type stuff. So, those are the ones you want to win, right? Like this draft is kind of going to, I think in hindsight, maybe produce a lot of NHLers, but maybe not at the superstar level. So, I know a lot of people were upset on that night, but I think you can all kind of like relax a little bit. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and you know that I can't claim to be a draft expert or a prospect expert. I do the best I can, but I don't have the knowledge that you do and some of these other experts do. But from what I was reading and just everything that I've been gathering, it really seems like you said, just that pool between about 7 and 14 is pretty much even talent wise. I don't really see much of a difference there. And I know there's a lot of discourse about people saying, oh, well, they should have lost a few more games at the end of the season. In hindsight, it's easy to say that, but then you look at just the nuts and bolts of everything. They win one more game, they're in the Islander spot. So,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
the draft lottery is tough. It's a crapshoot, and you never know what's going to happen. And obviously, we saw the result we did. And I'm also very interested to see what the Islanders end up doing. I find it hard to pass on Schaefer,
yeah.
but
That'll
I
be
think
tough.
yeah, the idea that you presented with possibly trading down is an option. I don't see them doing that, but it'll be interesting to see if they kind of take a chance on Hagens there. Um, but yeah, I guess for the next segment, we can kind of, if it's okay, just move right into some of the guys you think the Penguins might go for. Now, I know you've been talking a lot about Victor Eklund, rightfully so. I personally, I'm not sure that he's going to fall there. You always see guys fall every single year. It happens every year. But the guy I'm really interested is Aitchison. And I'd love to get your thoughts on Aitchison. Anybody else you want to plug to, whether it's Brady Martin, Jacob Ryan, the floor is yours.
Yeah. If you were to rank like what prospect I've had the most fun watching this year, like I think Aitchison's like a 1B. Like he's tied with like Justin Carbonneau. We'll talk about in a second, but like they're like 1A, 1B for me. I mean, excluding like the Schaefers and the Mises of the world, who like are obviously in a class of their own. I think, Kelsey, the problem is for people that they grossly underrate what Kayshawn Aitchison can do with the puck. Like when you hear people talk about him, you hear about the physicality and the hitting, which is the most fun part. You hear about like the swagger that he has, right? Which is also fun to watch. You hear about how good he is in the defensive zone. All of this stuff is true, but I think like for whatever reason it gets lost maybe in the shuffle of how good he is at carrying the puck out of the zone. I looked at some data. This is unbelievable, I had to quadruple check it to make sure it was right. But there's data that pulls together CHL talent, forwards and defensemen. Right, we're talking about everybody in this draft class, the whole kit and caboodle. Kayshawn Aitchison, 97th percentile for successful zone entries among forwards. That's including forwards, right? So, like, I don't know why it doesn't get discussed more. I think maybe it's because he's like a stall-like skater, and that it's like that slow gallop, that he has. It doesn't look, it's powerful but not quick, right? And I do think that like it's got to get a little bit better. Like I think if he wants to play consistently at a higher level, I think he does have to improve it a little bit. But I think that's going to come naturally. Like I think that's just going to happen as he grows up. Like it's not enough for me where I'm like, at a Simone Dupre level of concern to throw a name out there. But that's his game. He is punishing. And if you're coming through the middle, he's so good at hitting people laterally, right? And if you're coming through the middle with your head down, lights out. And it's legal. That's the critical piece to this, right? It's legal. There was a hit he had in the first round of the OHL playoffs where he put somebody in another dimension. And you look at the replay and it's shoulder, square chest, not leaving his feet. Just as clean as day. It's like that old Nicholas Cronwall vibe of like, just hitting people in a devastating but clean fashion. And again, I throw in like good defensively, great gap control, solid on his feet, hard to get around, sacrifices the body on everything. Like, took a lot of beatings this year in the shot blocking category and played, I think, through a lot of lingering, injury stuff because a result of that. But I go back to this sort of untapped offensive talent that we see from him. Barry had a really good run in the OHL and made it to the conference final and battled all the way to a brutal end and lost to be frank, a superior team. But the overtime heroics from him were what got them there. He scored major goals when the games are on the line and played that role of like fourth forward sometimes, where he's that involved. I mean, you look at him in the offensive zone, there's a lot of times that he's between the circles. I mean, he loves to get in there. So I think people sell him short on that. I liked him at 11, like if assuming they had kept the Rangers pick the way that things shook out before. I think if they walk away with him there, they just get, you don't never draft for like what you need, Kelsey, and they need everything, let's be honest. But like that, they don't have anything like this. And I don't know that they have. I know I couldn't even point to a guy that's a comparable here. Like it's just his ability to change a game is real, right? It is real, and it is difficult to put a tangible number on, but it exists, and you can watch it happen. And when the stage got bigger, you saw more and more and more. So I'm a huge fan. He's one of those guys though that the longer Barry played, the more his stock went up. And then you started to see rankings that had him at like 9, right? Or 7. That exists now. And I think he's in that boat of guys that like, the next name I'll throw at you, Brady Martin. I would have loved him for 11 3 weeks ago. And then he went to the U18s and lit the world on fire. And now Scott Wheeler said Monday night he could go 5. And that wouldn't shock him. 5 and 7 are 2 very likely destinations for him. So, and I thought, maybe that would impact Victor Eklund, but his team, he just helped his team secure promotion to the top flight of the Swedish Hockey League. So like, they won a championship and he was a big part of it. So his stock's not dropping, right? The thing with Eklund is he's small. He's the smallest forward in that range, from 1 to 12. And there are just general managers, we both know, that will stupidly, Cole Caulfield, pass on players they perceive as being too small to be effective. I think that if you say that to me about Victor Eklund, it's almost like you didn't watch him. Like I can't take people seriously when they bring up his size because, the one advantage he has over the other names we'll talk about is he's playing pro hockey, right? Like he's already playing pro hockey. He's not bound by a transfer agreement, so he can come to the American Hockey League much sooner than a lot of other guys could. And he put grown men down this year, like put them down. People tried to hit him and bounced off of him. He was laying people to waste, Kelsey, like big hits. Like, and I used the Kunitz comparable because Chris Kunitz wasn't the biggest guy, right? Like he was technically a small forward, right? And he blew a lot of people up. And he does a lot of things that Victor Eklund does, which is disrupt things, forecheck well, get up ice and break up plays, win loose pucks. And then from there, he's got a lot of good individual skill that I think is still developing, and a really strong shot that set him up to, make a lot of fruitful scenarios out of those turnovers. So he was, a lot of people talk about Anton Frondel. They were teammates. They played on the same line for most of the year. Once Frondel got called up, I think Frondel enjoyed a lot of the space that Eklund creates. And I'm not going to say that Eklund's the better player. I think they're discernibly different players, and I think Frondel has the higher ceiling. But I think Victor Eklund did a lot of work that gave Frondel a lot of time and space to snipe the puck the way he does and to earn some of the attention he got. So I don't want to attribute all of Frondel's success to Eklund, but it was, Frondel's a player who loves that. He loves time and space, and he loves to use that cannon of a shot. And I really think Eklund gave him that time and space this year by virtue of how disruptive he was. So those are 2 names. Then another one that people don't talk about a lot, and it's kind of like maybe a tiny bit of a reach, but I like Lyndon Lakovic. You got to mention that he did have a bit of an issue. As far as we know, it was hazing related last year. We don't have a ton of detail around the situation. But you have to mention it, right? That's not a great look. For all intents and purposes, he's done his due diligence and is meaningful with it. I'm also not in the combine and will not be interviewing him, so take that for what it's worth. But he's just a big player. He's a big, strong, powerful wing with a good shot, and I think unique in the sense that he's one of the only guys in that range that has size and likes to use it, and not in like a wasteful way. But he's difficult to move. You don't see him take guys wide. You see him go through them, right? And I like the potential there because he's already using physical tools to his advantage, Whereas there are guys in that range like, Roger McQueen, I wish he would do more of that, right? I think like he's the biggest guy in that range, and you don't always walk away with that impression. So just a couple, those are a couple of them. I know people ask me a lot about Jackson Smith. I wouldn't hate it. Doesn't do a lot for me. Big puck moving defenseman. Not really. I didn't see enough from him defensively to make me jump for joy at that pick. And Radim Murtka is another name you hear a lot there. Same thing, but opposite. Great defensively. Didn't see enough from him on the other side to make me jump for joy at that either. A guy I think who has a really high basement because he's a great. He reminds me of Brian Dumoulin, to be frank with you. Big, reachy, hard to get around, good skater, doesn't handle the puck like it's a grenade. That's kind of Dumoulin to a T. So I think it's not a risky pick, but the ceiling, I don't know how high it is. I think that question, I don't think it's got a Dumoulin level of a ceiling, right? I think maybe you're looking at like a third or fourth pairing guy that you can reliably put on a penalty kill. That's the thing, Kelsey, with this range is a lot of these guys, I think you look towards the ones that have top 6 potential. The last one I'll throw at you is Justin Carbonell. There was a while where I thought like somebody was going to snatch him up before 11, but with some of these risers that you've got, like the Aitchisons, the Martins, even Eklund for that matter, they're kind of moving him around. And I think he is by far, hands down, without question, the most individually talented player from like a dangling skill perspective in the class. I don't think anyone in this class can even come close. But he does things I've never even seen before. So I don't it's uncanny, right? And it's hard to project like what does that look like at the next level? Can he live off of that? But you look at his shot, grade A, legs, grade A, disruptive, not on an Eklund level with his physicality, but just his presence, right? Like he's not leaning on people and hitting them, but he's just annoying and a good skater, and that makes it tough. Makes it tough sledding for defensemen. So that's the name that I wonder about. And I don't, I think that if there's a slide there, I wouldn't be shocked if the Penguins had him as their best player available. I love Jake O'Brien. You and I have talked about Jake O'Brien. I think the Jake O'Brien dream might be over at 11. Unfortunately, he'll be on my list. My endorsement list is going to be like a grocery. It's going to be a mile long. But O'Brien's a name that I loved at 9, and I thought was a real possibility at 9. But I think like 9-10 is where he's going to go. So I unfortunately don't see him being there at 11. But if he is, another one of those guys, I said Carbonell is number 1 for me. The things that he can do with the puck on his stick and the commitment he has to playing a 200-foot game make him sort of like a tantalizing prospect. So, we'll see what happens with this Rangers pick, Kelsey. But if they get the opportunity to go back to back, and we have no idea what New York's going to do, but if they get an opportunity to go back to back, they're going to get guys potentially who immediately slot into the upper tier of their organization with regards to like skill level. Which doesn't say much about the prospect pool as it sits today, but they need this help, right? Even if it's one player, it's going to be somebody that is going to really help sort of change the trajectory of where they presently sit.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And you mentioned all these names, and the more the names pile up, I think it kind of speaks to just how many options are in that range and how many different ways teams could go too.
Yeah.
It's honestly just like I was saying, the lottery is a crapshoot. I think this range is kind of a crapshoot because I'm also of the belief that you don't draft for positional need. You just take the best player available and the best player that's, there for you at the slot you're drafting. But you start to wonder if teams start prioritizing those things given the pool of talent. And I guess I want to ask you too. So if it would come down, say the Penguins don't have the Rangers pick this season, they're at 11. There's an option to draft a center, someone like a Martin or Brian versus an Aitchison. Who are you taking then?
I mean, I think that it would depend on who's available and at the top of my board, but I don't think I would look at it from the position of center or defenseman. Yeah, I'm with you. I think there are some teams, Kelsey, that have a prospect pool that's glutty enough that they can be more targeted in what their best player available is. That is not the Penguins, right? Like, I don't think they can afford to look a gift horse in the mouth, for lack of a better phrase. I think whoever's at the top of the list that's there at 11, you absolutely have to take.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same camp, and it'll be interesting to see if they get that Rangers pick. I'm of the belief that the Rangers will probably keep it this season, rather than defer it, but you never know. They're kind of right on that fringe there. And also, I mean, with the 2026 draft, they might be thinking, hey, we might want to defer that. Although, I would imagine they're going to try to improve this offseason so that pick won't be as high next season.
The catch
Um,
22 there is, I think you're right. They just, I mean, look, they just unloaded Fort Knox to give money to Mike Sullivan. It's pretty indicative of their intention. But the draft is better next year, right? And
yeah.
I wouldn't. So you're starting to get this prevailing sense now where like people are backing off that a little bit. And there's been a couple articles that have been written like this week that have been like, that's actually not true. It's not that much better. It's just really the top 6 or 7 that's that much better. And then once you get past the 6 or 7, it sort of like normalizes. I still think it's better. And I've had people say to me like 13 this year, there may not be that big of a difference between like 2021 next year. Like you might not really be all that far off. And I just wonder what the opinion of their scouting department is. Cause like the McKenna ticket is one thing. I don't think I don't, like you said, I don't think their intention is to be anywhere near a situation where they could be in McKenna contention. But that's a tradable pick too, right? So
Yeah.
if you're in a position where you're playing really well and the trade deadline comes around next year, what kind of capital do you have to make a deal, right? I think that's an important question too. So all this is to say that this is the muddiest waters we've ever seen when it comes to like a decision being made at the next, when it comes to a pick. I have absolutely no idea what to expect, but um, it's like you come up with 10 reasons why they'll keep it. You can come up with 10 just as good ones why they might give it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think too, I mean, there's got to be the possibility out there too that if the Rangers do let the Penguins have that pick this year, I mean, Kyle Dubas has mentioned possibly dabbling in the RFA market.
Yep.
And going after some of these pending RFAs, trading for their rights before they, an offer sheet comes into question. And you think of the situation with Marco Rossi over in Minnesota right now. I mean, Bulgarian pretty much coming out and saying that they're probably going to trade him. So,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see what they do with that pick if they get it. I think if they choose to draft 2 guys back to back, can't really go wrong there. But I think there's a possibility that they might do something with that pick too.
Yeah.
It'll just be really interesting to see how all that plays out. But prospect talk aside, let's kind of shift to where the Penguins are now, prospect wise. And I
Yeah.
just want to get your thoughts on Ville Koivunen and Rucker McGroarty, especially just some of these guys we've seen throughout the year, and maybe where you think the Penguins prospect pool is as it stands now.
Yeah. I think in like the grand scheme of the league, it's still bottom third.
Yeah.
But it's the middle of the bottom, or I would like maybe upper third now. Like, it's like a real possibility.
Middle.
So you're still living in the basement, but it's a finished basement, I guess we could say, right? It's a
Yeah.
little bit nicer. Last year was huge, right? Because like the Koivunen and McGroarty things, and I don't want to disparage Braden Yeager, right? Who just got the call from Winnipeg to be a Black Ace and is now a part of that org, but he's a year behind Rucker McGroarty, right? Like I think what we saw from Rucker McGroarty in the final part of the regular season was proof positive that he's ready, right? Like that we don't need to season him in the American Hockey League next year. Like put him in camp, see how he does, find a spot for him, and let's see how this thing works out. You always the decision making thing is what's blowing me away. I think he took leaps and bounds in his decision making and his anticipation and game sense, but his skating is better. Like that's what everyone wanted to see, right? Like you wanted to see a better skater, and that's what you got. I think it'll only get better. It's unfortunate, like the foot is a killer, right? In the context of that, because not having him in the playoffs was brutal, and then it's going to delay the time before he can get back on his feet. But that's what he's going to focus on in the offseason. I mean, it's no question about it. I think with that assignment in hand, he'll come back to camp looking even more fleet of foot. And I think he's solved the biggest question that was out there about whether or not he could stick. Right, it was skating. That I no longer have that concern. He played with Sidney Crosby and kept up. That's not an easy thing to do, even at age 37. with how fast he thinks the game. But you throw Koivunen in that mix, and that was the real hit, right? They obviously went for quantity over quality with that trade. You didn't see any Jackson Blakes come over, right? Like the cream of the crop of the Carolina prospect pool stayed intact. And you kind of chipped away at sort of like the upper middle of it. But you hit on one, I think, pretty clearly in Ville Koivunen. This was his first pro year, and he, just absolutely dominates the AHL rookie scoring race. Looked great, I think, both even strength and on the power play. And as the year went on, the game seemed to just get slower for him. It seemed to slow down, and you started to see him making these unbelievable individual plays, mostly in puck distribution and in passing. But he's got some finish in there too. And I think that same story as I just said with McGroarty, he proved that he can play, right? There was no point when he was up here for that cup of coffee that you think like looks out of place, right? In fact, the more time he spent up here, the better he looked. And then when he went back to the American Hockey League level, the stats don't look great, and Wilkes-Barre kind of got obliterated in the postseason. But you could tell the game was moving slower for him down there, and it was almost like that's almost the proof you look for to say whether or not a guy is ready. Like what happens when he goes back down? I think that like you check the box. So I think you've solved two not problems at wing, but you open up options now. Like, we've heard Rickard Rakell's name get mentioned for a trade 1,000 times. And the big concern was you don't want to leave Crosby without a plaything, right? You don't want to leave him without a line mate. You got two options now, right? That's more like now you could do some shuffling around there and get those guys in. So you throw in a name like Brunick, right? Who again didn't look out of place in the American Hockey League playoffs, had an unbelievable goal that almost gave Wilkes-Barre some life to stick around for a little while longer. I think he's ready. Owen Pickering is another name you throw in there. That's like I wouldn't be shocked if he got the full-time call next year and you kind of saw him back up with the big club. So it's better. It's looking pretty decently in goal. I know that, not everybody's super high on Joel Blomqvist right now, and I understand that, but Murashov showed a lot this season. I know his season ended in a pretty disappointing fashion, but he showed a lot. You don't feel like you have to really address goalie right now. You got a little bit of everything as opposed to having nothing. So Tristan Breau is another name we got to mention. Is maybe not like a superstar level guy, but a guy who's showing signs of being able to play in the NHL level as well. So overall, it's night and day difference. Even though we haven't eked out of that basement spot yet, you can tell things are kind of coming along nicely.
Yeah, and it's honestly, even if you look back, a year ago with where this prospect pool was at compared to where it is now. I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's been an injection of at least some NHL projecting players in there. I mean, before we were talking about Sam Poulin being, like the guy at the top of the list, but all of a sudden you have these guys in the mix and they're periphery players, but they're still players that can, help you in the long run. Mm-hmm. And, if you can add some of these more central pieces like a top pairing defenseman, like a top six center, I think those pieces start to come into place a little bit more. And I guess just on that note, do you see anybody in their current prospect pool, especially let's go on the defensive side? Do you see anyone projecting as a top pair defenseman, or projecting as a point per game player at this point, if you're going on the forward front?
I think the closest thing you've got right now is Harrison Brunick. That's really the name that and it's again because with specific to Kamloops, Kelsey, they were so bad, right? Yeah. They were an awful team. And he had to do, it was one of those situations where he was doing so much heavy lifting that you're like, I really hope this isn't a bad thing in the long run. Cause like habitually, like he was ignoring a lot of his teammates, but you understand why, like he's the only one out there that can make something happen. So when you see someone sort of like pick a team up by the scruff of the neck and they're not a forward and drag them to collecting points on some nights, you got to say like, hey, there might be something there. I'm interested to see what it looks like with more talent around him. And we got a little bit of a taste at the end of the year, but a full grind of pro hockey will tell us a lot. But I think because of the way he can carry the puck, because of his shot and the offensive intangibles, that's the one name you kind of toss out there. if it were Pickering, Kelsey, it'd be more of like a Dumoulin role where he's playing like the cleanup to a Letang, and being more of like a defensive a 1B type option. But I think Brunick's the one that is very clearly capable of having a major impact on the outcome of a game.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. And I another thing with Brunick too. I mean, even if you watched him in the short AHL sample at the end of the season, you saw at the beginning of that sample he was making some of those mistakes. He was trying to do too much,
Yeah.
and he got burned a couple times. And then towards the end, that started to even out a little bit. His decision making was a little bit better. And I got the chance to watch him in training camp, as a lot of other people did. Obviously, there's been a little bit of a growth curve. Since then, he did have that injury that kept him out for about 2 months this season, which is pretty unfortunate. But, I think there's some promise with some of these prospects that they have that, like I said, they can be peripheral pieces. Brunick is probably, in my opinion, their top prospect. Maybe throw Murashov in there. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But it just seems to me that they still really need to get that, bona fide top pairing defenseman, that top six center. And that's where you can use the draft. And that's where you can use some of these, if they want to go explore the RFA market, that's where you can use that Rangers pick to get someone like a Rossi, that another team might not be able to afford, or that are looking to the trade market. So it'll be interesting to see how they navigate the situation they're in. And speaking of which, I guess that's kind of the last thing I want to discuss today is, where do you think the Penguins are in terms of timeline? Because I think it's kind of, very clear that they're transitioning into this rebuild. They're already kind of a year into it. But they're also, it seems like they're kind of trying to target, more NHL ready prospects, more, NHL ready young talent that can help in the near term and the long term. So where do you see this team's timeline projecting as of now? And do you think this draft class, or even heading into next year, could have any kind of semblance on what that timeline could look like?
Yeah, I don't think this year's does. I think if they got, an Eklund, we'll throw that name out there again. It's like a nice to have. And I think it's great for your organizational depth. And I think it gives you a potential top six wing. But I don't know that he's going to come in next year. I mean, I'll skip Eklund because he played pro hockey, but we'll pick like an Aitchison. No chance. I don't think there's any chance he plays pro next year, right? There's most of the guys in that range are probably going to be the same answer for me. But if you are bad enough next year to get into the top five, like there's some good players around outside of Gavin McKenna. Like I'm a big Vigo Bjork fan of that kid, and he's been unbelievable this year. There's consolation prizes to McKenna that, they're not at his level, but they're at a level where you get one and you're like, okay, this is a player I can build around later, right? Like I have somebody I can add around and focus on this skill set as my sort of primary building block, right? Like a keystone, if you will. And I think that there's some of those guys coming down the line. It's also a year away, and it's so hard to say what happens next year. But if we just go off the information we have today, I still think, Kelsey, to answer your question, like I cannot see a scenario in my mind where they fully turn this boat around during Crosby's contract, right? Like that maybe the final year, like maybe the last year of his current deal. You could talk me into like, if they strike gold with some RFAs and if Sergei Murashov is the second coming of Marc-Andre Fleury, maybe I'd entertain that conversation, but I think that's a stretch. Like I still think it's, you're looking at a time beyond him. And preparing for what that reality looks like and trying to make a balanced group, right? That's not reliant on any one player, but has core pockets of talent that can fill out 2 or 3 lines and help you turn the boat around. So, I don't think they're resigned to anything. I think they're going to actively try to keep their hands in both cookie jars. I think it's just going to be a really difficult thing to pull off successfully.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. And I'll be interested. I mean, like even Kyle Dubas said this in the postseason presser too. He basically said if they compete and make the playoffs next year, it'll be a surprise to him.
Yeah.
And I think that's an overwhelming sentiment. I could see them maybe pushing a little bit more next summer, depending on where they finish in the draft order. If they are in the mix for somebody like McKenna who can help right away. But I'm kind of with you there. I think it's kind of a stretch for them to be legitimate contenders, even in 2026, 2027. I think if Crosby's going to be here for legitimate Stanley Cup contention again, it's going to be with an extension, another extension.
Yeah, I would agree with you on
that.
Yep.
But yeah, anything else you want to add, Jesse, or anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I still have draft mixtapes that I'm going to be putting out. I got a lot of stuff I'm finalizing there, and I'm going to kind of go back again and extend some ones for some of the players that are in that range that the Penguins will be picking in, whether it's 11 or 11 and 12. So I'm going to really, most of the stuff I captured was from the regular season. So we'll probably do like playoff mixes for some of these guys and kind of highlight some of the things that they did that help their teams out. So I've got a Aitchison one that'll be out soon. I've got my Hagen's mixtape coming out soon. And Malcolm Spence is another name that I've got dropping in a little bit more of the late teens for him. But yeah, I'm going to be pumping them out all the way through the draft day.
Awesome. And that is very much appreciated. I will personally say that I watched your Aitchison mixtape right before I jumped on here, probably about 30 minutes ago. So you do great work. Keep it up. A lot of people appreciate it. There aren't a whole lot of, especially Pittsburgh-based reporters that are just putting in the prospect work that you do. So thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for coming on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And thank you all for listening. We'll be back at you next week with another episode of Pucks and Nat. In the meantime, stay out of trouble, Nat.